Hello, good morning. Um, Thanks for being here again. My name is Sherry. I think right? No, I don't know. Hi. Oh, yeah, I know you, actually. There isn't anybody here I don't know. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the church. And the woman sitting next to you is who I was talking about, but I think I even know you with the mask on. Anyway, doesn't matter. We're here, we're family and friends and community to talk about art. And Insight Sunday is a program in which we invite an artist always from the community. And in fact, one of the parameters of Insight Sunday is not only the East End, but the South Fork. Yes. Thank you. That wasn't me, that was April Gornick who determined that. She's around here somewhere. There you go. So maybe someday, once we make it through all the artists of the South Fork, we'll open it up to my homeland, the North Fork. But for now, there's plenty of artists here, as you all know. So one of them is Claire Watson, who is from Shelter Island, actually, but we count that as... Yeah. Watermill? Oh, I thought you guys were in Shelter. Well, I was wrong. Completely South Forker. Gosh, I'm having a tough morning. You know, we work a lot here. This is the 4th event this week, so I know. Sorry, everybody. But enough for my stand-up routine. Really here to introduce you to Claire Watson, who is a formidable artist, thoughtful artist, and an artist who is included in our current exhibition, Are You Joking? Women and Humor. And I think Claire intends to speak a little bit about the humor in her work, but also the gravitas and the formal components, and how this body of work that's in our exhibition, which is a somewhat older body of work, has informed much of her practice that's come since. Is that accurate? Yes. Okay, great. So let's get going. Enjoy.
Okay. That's good? Okay. So I'm going to let the slides be my prompts. I don't have notes. But this is, I was invited to speak. Well, wait a minute. First of all, thank you to the church. Thank you to Eric and April and Sherry and Kristen and the staff of the church. And thanks to all of you for coming on your Sunday morning. It's nice to see your faces. And I'm eternally grateful to Sarah for including my work in this show. And I know everybody's still in mourning about her leaving, but I showed Sarah a whole range of work. She was very clear about the ones that she wanted to include in the show. And I guess about the humor in the work, I'll say that, so this is one example of the 5 small sculptures that are upstairs. And I wasn't thinking about being funny when I mean, these were just images that came to mind when I was working with these materials. And if they're funny, I probably have work that's funnier. But these were the ones she really responded to. This one's called Metaform, and all of those works were made between about 2005 and 2007. And I was invited to focus on one work in the talk. And so to do that, what I feel I really need to do is take you through some images that show you how I arrived at this work. That's from nearly 20 years ago, and then what it led to. So my earliest work was architectural and anthropomorphic, always referring to the body. So this is the largest and maybe the best of those large pieces that were constructed. It's called What Sees But Won't Say, or Says But Can't See. And it's kind of a double beer, or pyre. And, but in the center is a structure that I thought of as like a sort of a gangplank tongue. So, it's two-sided, but I don't have an image of the other side. And at the same time that I was making these, I was doing these constructions that I think are better as descriptions than the actual works visually. I don't think were totally successful, but I was making casts of plaster casts of body parts and holding them together with different kinds of scaffolding. I'd been in Rome and I was really interested in the fragments of statuary that I was seeing all over Rome and just parts of figures. And so this is, when I first moved to New York, I had a small basement studio, and this was a so I'm taking you into my notebooks to show you how, I think that's the best way. So this was a large piece. It also doesn't exist anymore, but it was made of plaster and wood and lath. And this is another piece that never got realized, but just also these notebooks, by the way. It's so funny to see these pieces so large because the notebook is about 6 inches by 8 inches. So, and these drawings are from probably 1990 or 91. So I was already thinking about, the hand, structuring the hand in some way before I ever thought about before I ever happened upon the gloves. There's the first little drawing of what is a tobacco pipe on the left. I had a very tiny studio in New York City it was about the size of a closet, so I was working very small. And the tobacco pipe sculptures that I did, I just came upon a trove of tobacco pipes at a flea market that just really spoke to me, so I began working with those. But I also just wanted to show you the hand image that's on the next page. And these are some of the drawings for the tobacco pipe sculptures that occupied me for a few years in the early 90s. I made probably 20 or so of those. Was really interested in the pipes. As I said, as I found it in the flea market. My father had been a pipe smoker, and so had my grandfather. And, but I'd also been reading I loved Magritte's painting, Ceci n'est pas une pipe. I'd been reading something that Le Corbusier said about the tobacco pipe being the epitome of functional form, and I was just interested in kind of subverting that. So these are drawings, none of these became actual sculptures except for, that one I chose too to show you because it also resembles a hand. And then I'll show you just a few of that's maybe one of the first ones I made called Le Pipe Recamier for Madame Recamier in her coffin. And Ceci n'est pas. And La Doublette. So these were the last of these were made in about 1993, when my son Owen was born. Owen is here, and I have two sons. Owen was born in 1993, and I got very busy. We were building a house. We moved here, or we were building the house, and it wasn't finished, but we moved here anyway. And so we were occupied building the house. I was also working, and my second son, Keaton, was born in 1996. And so the studio I went on hiatus for about 10 years, and which I have no regrets about that at all. Something needed to go, and the studio was the logical thing. So, but when I did resume working in my notebooks, this is from 2000. Owen had some suggestions for me. So that's what he suggested. He liked the idea of a peepacopter, and then the peep whale, a Moby peep, peep-a-pillar, one of a peep, but what I thought was interesting about this page of the notebook is that I'm trying to just pick up where I left off. But on the very next page, you can see the shadow coming through the notebook. Oops. I'm thinking about gloves. And that's because someone who saw some of the pipe sculptures at a show in San Francisco commented that she was really surprised that a woman would be working with tobacco pipes. And that just stayed with me. I thought that was a really interesting comment, and I started thinking about, okay, well, what would the feminine object be that corresponds to a tobacco pipe for, if they're gendered, for if only men smoke tobacco pipes or handle tobacco pipes. And the glove, obviously I'd already been thinking about the hand as a structure, and gloves seemed obvious. Also, in the sense, in Le Corbusier's sense of the epitome of functional form, except the form is internal, where the pipe is an external attribute. So that was the reason for that. And these are just some of the notebooks. We're still in 2000. And I don't think any of these were actually realized as sculptures, but they were just ideas. So that's Owen contributed on this page in the upper right. Those are his drawings. So these next few are from the same time as the ones that are upstairs. And they were so I was looking at, to make these, I was looking at books about antique doll making, and they're stuffed with sawdust, and they have wire armatures that are holding the shapes sort of erect. And I just made little glove patterns for the fingers, and in this case, and this one those are thumbs, extra thumbs. I think this one's called Mint Well. There was something I wanted to say. Oh, it might come back to me. These are just stitches from the inside of the glove to create those are basically what my own palms look like, the creases. This one's called Believe Me You. And they were up to 2013. So this isn't a completely linear path. I did detours. There were other experiments with other materials, with rope, with baked salt dough sculptures, with things that I did with hair and wigs and ordinary tools, and then wooden kitchen tools and polymer clay. I did a number of different experiments, but this is more the direct line to the work that's in this show and what followed and what I'm doing now. So I'm back to thinking about glove forms, but a little differently. And in 2012, 2013, I made a series of works that really circled back and looked at the tobacco pipes and the gloves together. So this is a miniature glove with a tobacco pipe. It's like swallowed a pipe, sort of like in The Little Prince, doesn't the snake swallows a hat? Yeah, thank you, yeah. And so this one's called Sideways. I was thinking about shadow puppets, So this is a swan glove, and it's quite a bit larger. It's maybe 18 inches tall. So that's quite a large hand glove on the bottom, but a normal size glove hand onto the, but I made patterns for these. And sorry, you want me to go?
Made using found gloves, or are they all made from patterns?
No, they're made both. So usually I start with the found glove. There's some element of a found glove in the piece, but then when I alter it, I have to make a pattern often for the. Another thing I guess I should say about resuming work when I did and deciding to sew with the gloves is that it was something that was so easy to do with young children, because I could work at my kitchen table and I could actually work with them nearby. I had always tried to figure out how I could be in my studio and be with my children at the same time. It wasn't always possible, but so this one's from 2013, I believe, and it's called Fume. So it's a little, very small pipe, but it has doll hands and hair from a wig. This one is, again, a glove that I made from, it's a much smaller glove than a normal glove, because that's a normal-sized mannequin hand that it's swallowed. And this one is titled Not Clever But Ambitious. And so I amassed quite a collection of gloves. When friends and family members realized that I was working with gloves, and their mothers or grandmothers had big collections of gloves that they didn't know what to do with, I was given wonderful gifts of collections of gloves, and I still have it. I'm not through with the gloves. I'm not working with them currently, but I have a lot of gloves that are wonderful and that I will work with. But at this point in my notebooks, I'm trying to imagine how to use them all together, like how to create some kind of fabric or material where they're all combined. So these are from 2013. And so I'm thinking about what that might look like. But then when I actually get around to it, I'm very surprised by the form that the glove takes when it's opened up and stitched flat. I didn't expect that. So that was fun. And then I did a series having to do with these. So this particular one is made from 10 pairs of white gloves and 10 pairs of black gloves, and the image isn't great, but they're not altered. They're all just stitched as I found them. This one is called and what would the ancestors say, or something. What do ancestors say, I think, or ancestors say? Because I liked that the thumb pieces, which are 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, looked like little speech bubbles. So this was 2014, and this one is called Whereabouts Unknown. It resulted from an experiment where I dropped the kid gloves into, these were white kid gloves, not the middle one. The middle one was always a small child's glove, so it was already this really interesting, perfect small scale. But I dropped them all into boiling water just to see what would happen, and they immediately shrunk to tiny half size and became kind of almost like rawhide. So that was really interesting to me, and I did a few pieces with that. And this is much more vivid than the actual piece, but that led me to thinking about the mask shape that appeared when I opened the gloves. Made me wonder what would happen, what kind of forms I would find if I referred to the whole body and opened other garments, leather coats and pants. And of course, they're much more abstract, but my rule that I would follow is that I wouldn't alter the shapes. I would just use them to generate forms that, again, I hoped would kind of surprise me in the way that the gloves did. So these are 3 pairs of leather pants, and I did boil them and then sort of tack them to dry, stretch them to dry, kind of like animal hides, or what I imagined you might do with an animal hide. I started thinking of the clothing items as also kind of creatures that I was, anyway. So this piece is large. I mean, it's I think about 90 inches horizontally and about 30 inches vertically. But the pants did shrink to about half size. So that's, and they're wrinkled and distorted, and they're glued to a very thin plywood back, but they're also stitched through the plywood. So I drilled holes all along the edges. I felt like it required some kind of reference to stitching and garment making. These are more of those pieces in a show that was at Elay Arts in Amagansett in 2018. So that's where we are in time-wise. And then these are pages from 2020. So I have always worked in series, developing bodies of, oops, did I go forward? Bodies of work that are like distinct, like separate trains of thought. And sometimes I'm developing different trains of thought sort of concurrently, and that's the case here. The sketch on the right is for a series that I did in which I inset leather coats into canvas, but they also had sort of mask-like forms in them. I'll show you in just a minute. But on the left is a sketch for a piece that I eventually made. It just was a different approach. There's a lot of, well, I'll show you. So here's some different ideas for the first that I mentioned, in which I'm really not altering much the pattern shapes from the coat, but I'm applying false buttonholes and pocket slashes to create sort of a visage. It's another example. And these were shown, oops, in 2020. 3 of them were shown in a small gallery in Lower Manhattan called Essex Flowers with a wonderful sculptor, Esther Partegas. But also, this other body of work that I was developing at the same time, that's, you'll see the sketch on the right, is pretty much what happened when I actually realized the piece in a show at Duck Creek. So this is and I called this series Refiguring. I had decided that working with the leather clothing, I should really be working with a method that was sort of native to the materials, which is why I wanted to learn this tailoring method to actually inset the pieces into canvas and then stretch the canvas. Also because it was so hard to reclaim. If I wasn't happy with one of the pieces that was made on the shaped plywood, it was really hard to reclaim the material. It was just, you know, it's such, but this way I often use a seam ripper and take the pieces apart and start again. This is a very recent piece that is made from, it's a little bit, it's quite washed out in the slide, but the motorcycle, the pattern parts from the chaps, the motorcycle chaps, are sewn onto the canvas. They're not stitched in because the leather was so thick. It was hard to do that with the machine. But the lines that are like drawn lines are seams from, you know, stitching with the machine. And gesso is applied from the back, and that's what makes that sort of halo around the edge. And these, so I should put in a little plug for a show. I'm going to have at Guildhall in January of 2025, and this is one of the pieces that will probably be in that show. And that's it. That's now back to.
Ready for some questions?
Sure.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say something.
Okay.
I love all your work, you know, and I love the older and the newer and not all of it. But when I look at your work, I go, of course, why isn't everybody doing gloves? You know, I want to say, because everybody has this memory of gloves. Like when you're in kindergarten, and then this, when I was young, it was like the 50s, and you had these little straps that buckled onto your sleeve that you, so you wouldn't lose your gloves. And there's something so familiar about your work, like leather and pants and gloves, and I love that about it.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do you consider, I don't want to, I don't know, I'm trying to ask a question, but not in a loaded way. Okay. Because in the history of art, there is often a relationship between women, the gender of women, femininity, if you will, and sewing, women's work, women's labor, and how that has entered into 20th century art as a sort of form of feminism. Is that something that you ever think about?
Yes, of course. I think, you know, I felt very connected to all those traditions of women's work, handwork. When I was sitting and sewing the early gloves, particularly, I was taught to sew as a child, but I never enjoyed it, sewing clothing. I never had patience for it, although I have infinite patience for doing these things. I never, but, and my mother was a wonderful seamstress, and so was my grandmother, and my great-grandmother could do anything. We have some amazing examples of some of her tatting and lace making, and you know, she spent a lot of her time and energy apparently making these beautiful linen table coverings and antimacassars, the chair coverings. So I felt very connected to all of that, and I hope this work is sort of in conversation with also other textile and fiber artists that are working. But the other kind of labor that I think about when I'm making the more recent work is the labor, the unseen labor that's gone into the consumer object. And as we know, especially the cheap leather clothing that's ubiquitous is really made by very poorly paid labor in a lot of it in India, other countries where wages are very low. I think about all of that and what's the value of the labor? I'm undoing all of that. I find people give me wonderful leather garments to work with that they're finished with, but I also find them in thrift stores mainly and on eBay for very little money, and they're mostly relics of fast or disposable fashion, or they're odd colors someone wanted to wear one time but never again. So I think about all that too, and what And I think it's just an open question. What am I, with my labor, am I increasing the value? I mean, what's happened to the value of all that labor? I think that's just something I think about a lot. So,
It's a great question. Thank you so much.
yeah.
I have a couple of questions. The first is, how did you make the hair stand up in fumet?
That has also a wire armature inside. So it was just sort of a lot of hair, but sort of just wound. And then
Wound in.
somehow I must have tied it at the top. Yeah.
And then my second question, and it's more important, I think, and interesting, is I kept thinking about, you seem to be slightly obsessed in a great way with jointedness. I saw it even in your early sculptures that the fire pyre beer thing that you showed at the very beginning. It's like there's a lot of joints, and then when you went to the gloves and now the kind of flaying of pants and whatnot, it just seems like jointedness is part of your sensibility, and jointedness seems like a perfect vehicle for metaphor. So I was wondering what sort of metaphors, because I think a lot of these, the work upstairs and a lot of these and some of the current things are very metaphorically stimulating visually, and to know about their origin just augments all of that and goes deep into the culture, but it also has a kind of a weird transformational, shamanic, if you will, kind of quality. I was just wondering, what do you think about that?
Well, I think I didn't think specifically. That's a great question. You always have such great questions for people. I don't think I was thinking of that directly when I made the glove pieces, or even when I made the earlier works, the wooden works, but it is something I've thought about a lot more since one of my favorite books ever, and I think actually Owen introduced me to it, is called Patterns That Connect. I don't know if any of you know that book, and Owen, can you remember the author of the book? Ted Carpenter, yeah. No, it's really an anthropological study of different types of patterns that result from genealogical kinships, and how those are expressed through different media. But often the joints in early renderings of figures in different cultures represent different ancestral members. Like there are ancestors in the knees and in the shoulders and elbows, and and in some cases the fingertips have souls. Yeah, yeah. So it is something I think about more. It's and that's kind of what's beginning to come out with the work Ancestors Say, and also with the pieces that are the leather coat, shield, face. They have the buttonholes and slashes for faces. I'm thinking about all that. So thanks.
And what do you think of in terms of the humor of these? Because I think the ones upstairs are playful, but they also have that body of your work, and some of the later work too, for sure has a kind of a unnerving quality. So it delves or sort of heads straight for the uncanny, where you're looking at something that's stimulating and beautifully done and has a kind of a beautiful shape, but I think that it's kind of steering for the uncanny rather, and there is a kind of essential humor, I think, in that, but it's not ha-ha funny exactly. Just, can you talk about the humor element to you?
I didn't know they were funny, really. So, I mean, that wasn't my intention. At least I want to make something funny, or this will be funny. That's not what I was thinking. And actually, not everybody thinks they're funny. Some people think they're very creepy. I mean, I've had people tell me that, yeah. So,
Okay, lots of hands now went up. I'm going to just work my way back and come forward. Setha, you're next.
Hey, Claire.
Hey.
I love seeing all of your work from the beginning, and it brings so much more. Also, just your life and how you've sort of incorporated, your kids, your family life into your work, and I think for me that's always something that I've thought about and tried to, and I'm always very admiring of artists, especially women, that seem to be able to kind of seamlessly fuse the two. And I don't know if you feel like that, but it seems like there has been some, either because it's just practical sort of solutions to a problem, and I appreciate that. But what I was wondering is, one of the things you didn't really talk about, your sort of relationship with art history, and I think that so much of your work has a really strong connection to different periods of art history, and Sherry kind of alluded to it a little bit in terms of this sort of recontextualizing sort of art historical trends within a feminist perspective, and I see some of that, but I also just see a very strong connection to surrealism, to sort of geometric abstraction, and just wondering sort of what your thoughts are
Yeah,
there.
thank you, absolutely. So I, obviously, yes, love the surrealists, and Merritt Oppenheim, counts as a big, she's one of my heroines, but Louise Bourgeois, working with textiles and figures, so many, but probably, and I look at and love all kinds of art, and yes, geometric abstraction, and one of the things I'm conscious of doing is working, like creating these geometric abstractions in the newer work, but in the material and method that is common to women's traditions of handwork. But I think maybe one of my favorite places in the world for viewing art is the Met, because I love looking, I'm inspired by African art, by the oceanic art, and yeah, thank you. I don't know if I answered that very well, but yeah.
But you went right to my question. As an anthropologist, I look at your work, and I definitely see the resonance with the cultural array of images and negative space and connection, and even the craft itself. As someone who collects, indigenous pieces from all over the world, and that was the first thing that struck me. So it was really interesting going from Aman's question about sort of art history, which is more to her background. Your work is also speaking to me from my background as a cultural anthropologist interested in working in textiles, and that I think your insights about the mask and the jointing and the patterns and the genealogies is really strongly there. And you talked about it a little bit, but if you wanted to say more, for me, it just totally grabbed me as I said, she's an anthropologist. I said, she's a cultural anthropologist. She's a kindred spirit.
Well, I tend to see faces and figures everywhere, and so I read faces and figures in my work that may not be there for others, which is fine. It's one of the things that fascinates me about textiles, and I was able to do an artist residency at the Watermill Center, and really spent my time there looking at works in the collection, really from all over the world, but from Irish lace-making patterns to indigenous, clay pot figures, and African art, and seeing these mostly geometric patterns that were arising in all different parts of the world. I think that's really fascinating. And, and so in the patterns, I seem to always find figures, and I'm really interested in the mirroring of that happens, or that I'm always, the symmetry that I'm always either really kind of embracing or trying to defeat in the way the figure is.
I'm just going to add one thing. Sure. The other thing that a lot of indigenous women's traditions are using representational forms that only they know about or that are sacred to women. And that was just what I just wanted to add that. It seems to me your work is doing that, that you're seeing the image, or that the representation comes out of your very own life and might be shared with other women, but not with everyone.
Oh, interesting. It's like coded. Yeah.
I love all these questions. I love the questions you asked, April, about the metaphor. I'm curious about your process. We're speaking in these macro terms, but when you're actually working, you're working this fabric, working with it. Are you trying to answer a question? Is there a question that a problem that you're trying to solve, or are you allowing the work to show you, the material, what it wants to be? Do you know what I mean by that?
Well, I think it's both, because there's often, the technical problem of how the thing is going to fit together. But it's really, so it has to hold together. It has to have integrity as a structure, and that's always one of the first problems. Is that working? And then. But finally, sometimes that works, but visually, it's not what I want to see. And that's when I end up taking it apart and remaking it. So there's a lot of doing and undoing in my work. Not with these, that's not how these came about, but in the newer work, that's definitely, and of course, all artists have, troves of work that fail. That have failed, and so there, I won't show those, but for every piece that you see, there's probably 2 or 3 that just didn't make it, So there's a lot of experimentation and trial and error, and so there are those questions of just how to do this.
The question I'm asking is also, do you have a sense of what the project might be at the end, or are you letting it sort of guide you through the process of making it?
Well, both. I often do think I know what a thing is going to look like. And we're talking about different, we've sort of galloped through a lot of different years of, but, so I will do my best with my current work that's more abstract to lay the pieces out on the floor and arrange them and rearrange them, or work in my notebook, and I think I know what's going to happen. And that part is all very kind of free form, and that can go on a long time. But once I actually start putting it together, that has to be very deliberate, because there's only one way that they're going to fit together. And rarely does it look like what I thought I was making. So, yeah. So, of course. Hi.
I love your work. This is really exciting to see.
Thank you so much.
And I just kind of had a question about craft.
Sure.
It sounds like, in my mind, and then how craft sort of kind of mixes with your life. Like, I sort of see you beforehand doing a lot more with wood and harder materials, and you said something about kind of wanting to be able to work with your children around. So can you talk a little bit about your background and your making background, and how you, it seems very brave to kind of switch to a completely different material altogether. Not just brave, but also really well executed. So I was curious kind of how you see craft and what your background was kind of before.
So I studied painting as an undergraduate. My painting was my major, but but actually what I was really doing was building objects and painting them. I was doing independent study with the sculpture department. So when it came time to go to graduate school, I realized I needed to apply as a sculptor. So I think I just have always really, I love painting, but I don't call myself a painter in these, I really am a sculptor. I have so much respect for painters who paint, who really paint with paint. And the only paint I use in these works is gesso. And just because I want to add, in the later works, just because I want to add that inert mineral element and areas of contrast to the fabric and the leather and the canvas. And also I think the work, so I kind of sometimes miss working with building big things with wood. But it's just not practical. I mean, it's just, what do you do with them? I mean, if I, and so I don't do that. Although if I had an opportunity, if I were commissioned, it's funny too, when I was making these works, I was invited in about 2010 to submit a proposal for a large outdoor sculpture in this form. And so I did. I got bids from a foundry, a metal foundry, and from a fiberglass fabricator. And if my proposal had been accepted, the sculpture would have been on the corner of 54th and 6th. Right now, that could have been quite a game changer, but that. But it wasn't accepted, but that was an interesting exercise in thinking, and I'm fascinated with changes in scale. So I'm also really interested in the way the miniature functions in the imagination, and how a small work can be very powerful because we magnify it in our imagination. And I guess that's what I was thinking when I went to this scale, from having worked in a much larger scale. One of the I guess maybe the favorite class I ever taught was the title of the class was something like Monumental Sculpture Through Photography and Model Making. And I got to be a guest, an artist in residence at Middlebury College for one semester, and I worked with the students. It was before Photoshop, so I was having them make models or maquettes of what they envisioned their sculptures to be, and then photograph them like little dioramas, and that was the work. So I don't know if you asked about craft, and it's different depending on the scale, the way it's approached. One of the things also that I try to be aware of is I can tend to really over-finish, like over-craft a thing. I have to be careful about that because I do get very obsessive about the thing. So I make notes to myself about kind of unfinishing things, No. Well, even I mentioned the 10-year hiatus, but I kept working in my notebooks, and I did a lot of writing, and I did a lot of working in my head. But it just, I'm really glad that I knew a lot of women who did successfully continue almost full-time in their studios and raise children and teach. Mostly they were teaching. They had college-level teaching jobs, and I so admired those women. I don't know how they did that. But in my case, I was working jobs that were, just because to bring in some income. And for a little while I tried, I was going to work 3 days a week and use one of those days to fund a babysitter to have that day in my studio, and that just didn't make any sense. I knew I would always get back to work, and I mostly didn't want to miss that period of my children's lives. Yeah.
Any other questions? Story? One more?
The children were every minute worth 10 years and more, obviously. But I just wanted to ask you about hiatus. What is its value apart from the reason for it? As an artist, do you value having to change, having to cease the studio for a while or limit it down?
Well, I don't recommend it, if you, I think we try to, it happens though for all kinds of reasons, health or finances or, there are all kinds of reasons that an artist might have to take a break, short or long, and it can be scary, you can begin to imagine that you might never get back to work, and actually that's happened to me with much shorter. I've had other hiatuses too that have been much shorter that were more scary because I had some sort of a block, and that's a scary kind of hiatus where you just and who knows why that happens sometimes, but in this case I always knew I would get back to work, and you just keep the faith. And I think you pick up, you begin where you left off, and then it's just the habit of being in the studio every day is what, and just showing up and being there is what allows the work to come forth. So, yeah.
Claire Watson, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone.